So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending. My name is Derek Leverton. I'll be moderating today's presentation focused on the site selection update. So I'd like to introduce several folks from SAS Power joining me today. First is Nanette, Manager of Supply Planning here at SAS Power. As well, Sarah Klein-Bentley. Sarah is a siting lead for the SMR project and a senior engineer with SAS Power's supply planning team, as well as Allison Champion, who is the Manager of Nuclear Regulatory Affairs. So at the end of May, SAS Power announced the two potential sites that have been chosen in the narrowing process for Saskatchewan's first potential small modular reactor, or SMR. Both sites are located within the Estevan study area. While a final investment decision won't be made until 2029, this progress moves SAS Power closer to a major milestone of a final site selection. SAS Power has hosted many virtual presentations to share information on the project, including an overview of nuclear power and the industry in Canada. We won't be going into those details today. If this presentation is your first engagement event on the project, our previous events were recorded and can be viewed on our project website. We'll post that link in the chat. If your question isn't addressed during the presentations today, you can submit a question to us by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen in Zoom. All questions will be coming to me, and at the end of the presentation, I will ask our presenters to provide a response. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat function, and one of our team members will provide you with support. And at this point, can I ask you, Allison, to pop on and provide a land acknowledgement before we continue?
Thanks, Derek. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Champion, and like Derek said, I'm the Manager of Nuclear Regulatory Affairs here at SAS Power. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that SAS Power's work reaches the ancestral lands of many nations. As a Crown utility, we reaffirm our relationship with the peoples of these lands and our shared determination to preserve the lands for generations to come. I'm calling into you today from Treaty 4 territory where I work and live. I would like to highlight that June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada, which is an opportunity to learn about unique cultures, traditions, and experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. You can find more information on the Government of Canada's website. This year, the week of June 10th to 16th has a theme of children and youth. And I would like to share that I have a young family who has become very interested in understanding the meaning and themes of Orange Shirt Day, as introduced to them through their schools by reading the book Phyllis's Orange Shirt. So that's the book that's targeted toward ages 4 to 6, and there's another book that's targeted for the older ages. But they had become so interested in the book that they, made me buy it. So we do have it and own it at home. But they also wanted to learn more. So we went and visited our local library, and they became very interested in a book called When I Was 8 by authors Christy Jordan Fenton and Margaret Pokiak Fenton, which is based on a true story of the author's Margaret's life. I encourage all to visit their local libraries to look into other Indigenous culture resources that might be of interest to the children and youth in your life.
Great, thanks, Allison. Okay, so here's a look at our agenda. First, we'll begin with an overview of the future power supply work that considers all power generation options in our long-term supply plan. Then we'll walk through the site selection update, including the process that informed SAS Power's recent decision announced at the end of May 2024. We'll then share more about the project in general and what's coming up in the near term. And then with the time that we have left, we'll turn it over to you to ask any questions. And we'll wrap up the presentation by sharing a few dates and times for engagement activities later this month and taking place over the summer. So next, I'm going to ask you if have you previously participated in any SAS Power events? So I'll pop that poll up there. You should see that now. So that's the question. Have you attended any of the following SAS Power engagement events? So some related to future supply, or related to SMR, maybe you've been to both, or neither. So if this is your first time attending, then that's the fourth option there. I'll leave that open for a moment. Okay, thanks for your response. It looks like so far we have some that have been to both, some that are first time attending, and about 20% that have been to an SMR event previously. So yeah, so for those of you that are new, welcome. Okay, I want to invite Nanette, and as I mentioned, Nanette Salamon's the manager of supply planning at SaskPower. She's going to walk us through some of the information on the future power supply plan.
Thanks, Derek. So when we talk about the future supply plan, we like to start with where we are today. And this slide shows you Saskatchewan's power mix today. So currently, we still get about 65% of our power supply from fossil fuels in the form of natural gas and conventional coal. We have about 20% of our power coming from hydro facilities and over 10% coming from wind facilities. The rest is made up of solar power, waste heat, flare gas, and one carbon capture and storage facility that we have on one of our conventional coal units. This year, we've been working on updating our long-term power supply plan. And for the first time, we've invited our customers to learn more about the supply options we already use and some that we're considering for the future. Our team is responsible to assess and recommend power generation supply options, as well as develop short and long-term supply plans. For the first time, as I mentioned, we've included that public engagement, and we're really going through this together with our customers to take input on those steps as we develop our plan. We're nearing the end of our future power supply engagement process, and a final report is due later in June. You can check out the process by visiting saskpower.com/engage. I'd just like to mention that SaskPower is on track to meet our 50% below 2005 levels of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030, and we will be adding up to 50% renewables by 2030 as well. And that is work that will be included in that plan. So just to recap a little bit of our public engagement, we went out in 5 different stages to engage with the public. And this is a process that goes along with the internal analysis that we do at SaskPower. So in the first stage, we were really asking people how they want to engage, online, in person. In the second stage, we were looking to understand people's priorities and really found out that reliability, affordability, the environment are top priorities for people. We did some work in-house and came back out with scenarios to explore, and we discussed those with our stakeholders, our customers in stage 3. And then that information fed into really the results of the plan, which we brought out in draft in stage 4. And that draft is, we took a little bit of engagement on that as well, and you'll see the results in the final report here at the end of June. Along the way, we shared where we're at with assessing considerations for the long-term plan. We received input from customers. We used that in our analysis. And we also responded to people's questions and added additional educational opportunities tailored to the information they were looking for. Just a quick summary of participation to date. I'll just highlight that through the various methods that we reached out to people, we achieved over 61,000 surveys. That's contacts with people in Saskatchewan that we're really proud of. In fact, our manager of stakeholder engagement actually won an industry level award from Electricity Canada for leading this process. And we feel that that level of contact with the public has led us to be very successful. We hope that our customers feel satisfied with the end result as well. So what is a long-term supply plan? Really, it's a roadmap to provide direction for our future planning to ensure that SaskPower can continue to provide reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective power to 2050. There's no one path or no one scenario out to 2050 that's really perfect today. The plan is not to pick one path. It's really to look at those paths and see what lessons we learn. Those lessons help us provide recommendations and direction that guide our near-term planning. Planning is always an iterative process, and we update our long-term plan about every 2 to 3 years as things continue to change. So let me show you the 7 lessons that came out of our process this year. The first lesson, we heard loud and clearly from customers, they're concerned about the price of power. They're concerned about the price of power now and into the future. And power rates must remain cost competitive with our neighbors. Many customers want to help Saskatchewan reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions. We need interconnections with our neighbors to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions, increase reliability, and manage cost. And the fourth lesson is really a lesson that has been at the heart of our planning for many years. We reiterated that our long-standing reliance on a diverse supply mix is necessary to continue to reduce risk. We need power supply alternatives to keep our options open. And we'll talk more about this lesson in a couple of slides. The fifth lesson that we learned is that Saskatchewan residents really want to know that we're looking at every supply option. We also learned that the energy transition will lead to new challenges for our system that we need to accommodate to maintain reliability. At the same time, we must maintain and update our aging power system. And finally, we understand that we must comply with the law, and as regulations change, we must be quick to adapt. So it's important to us that the federal government understands Saskatchewan's unique challenge to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at that fourth lesson, because that really leads into our discussion today. The fourth lesson is around that diverse supply mix and the need to develop new low and non-emitting technologies. Under this recommendation, we've identified 6 short-term actions to 2035. This includes looking at carbon capture and storage on natural gas facilities, similar to how we've looked at that on conventional coal facilities. It also includes considering, could we transition some of those coal units to operate on natural gas directly? And that would help extend the life of those units under current regulations. We've recently installed our first 1-hour battery, and now we're looking at what is our options for longer duration storage, such as 4-hour batteries or compressed air energy storage. We're taking a second look at our hydro projects. We have an inventory of potential hydro projects, and we're considering which of these are most cost effective and could be potential options post 2035. We're also looking to maintain our current build out of wind and solar as we look to add up to 3,000 megawatts by 2035. And we're continuing collaboration with our industrial customers. We have some programs such as the Renewable Access Service that helps improve our ability to add renewable projects onto our system. Focusing just on nuclear for the same recommendation, the SMR project is a key part of the actions required to address that need. We cannot successfully transition to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 without new technologies to meet our increasing demand for power. So for a short-term action around the nuclear power project, this is the conversation that we're really here to talk about today, where we're planning to conclude our nuclear power investigation of small modular reactors for an investment decision by 2029 and potentially in service date by 2034. And then in the long term, if our system grows, we might even be looking to some of those larger nuclear facilities or potentially advanced reactors. Nuclear power produces power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means it provides a continuous, reliable source of electricity. A small modular reactor provides between 50 and 300 megawatts, which would make it the largest emissions-free energy source in the province and could help us achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions from electricity production. To give you an idea, a 300 megawatt small modular reactor could produce enough power to energize about 300,000 homes. Small modular reactors are currently the right size for our energy needs and infrastructure here in Saskatchewan. And the modular design means that many parts could be assembled off-site, which helps to limit construction costs and reduce schedule delays. And I'll pass it back to Derek.
Okay, thank you. Next poll that you see on your screen now, just curious, what site selection area are you from? So are you from Estevan area, Elbow area, or from outside of those two areas? So I'll just give you a moment to respond there. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it looks like about 60% from Estevan, 20% from the Elbow area, and about another 20% or so from outside of both of those areas. So thank you for that. Okay, this is Sarah Klein-Bentley. Sarah is a siting lead for the SMR project and a senior engineer with SaskPower supply planning team. So Sarah, I'll let you handle this next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Derek, and thank you all for joining. We're really excited to be able to give a project update today. So you may have heard the announcement last week that we narrowed our search for a potential site to host an SMR facility down to 2 near the city of Estevan. So one at Boundary Dam in the RM of Estevan and the other on the Rafferty Reservoir, so in RM of Cambria. In this presentation, I'd like to take this opportunity to walk you through a high-level overview of the SMR siting process and all the progress we've made this year. So this here is a high-level overview of our siting process, and I'll be doing a deeper dive on each of these steps in later slides. Overall, the process has 5 steps, starting with selecting the best suited technology for SaskPower. And we used a number of siting criteria, including technical, engineering, safety, as well as environmental and social cultural criteria to identify the most suitable areas in the province. The siting criteria was used to identify siting areas and was then further refined through public and stakeholder engagement. And once we had narrowed the list of potential sites, we undertook a number of detailed studies on that shorter list to further aid in site selection, which is where we're at right now. So as I mentioned, the first step of our siting process relates to selecting the technology and understanding the technical requirements. SaskPower went through a tech evaluation and selected the GE Hitachi BWRX 300. And the technology selection allowed us to create the initial list of technical, engineering, and safety requirements for the project. And when we identify the risks and understand the technical requirements of the technology, we can then identify technical siting considerations required for the project. We also need to consider Canada's nuclear regulations and standards, as well as SaskPower's business considerations. So the technical requirements for any specific facility can have an influence on locations that best support a project. And for example, in our case, access to water for cooling is important. In step 2, we determined the information needed to complete a robust evaluation for identifying suitable siting areas that meet technical, social, cultural, and environmental requirements. The process included identifying over 50 relevant siting criteria, which were grouped into the 3 themes you see here, the technical, social, cultural, and environmental. We also pulled together spatial regional data for each siting criterion and developed a map showing how each criterion or indicator influences a specific area. An indicator workbook is a catalog of all the criteria that has been considered. Each indicator is described in detail, mapped, and given a weight of importance. And so when we pull together the layers of spatial information with consideration to their importance, the output is a map of suitability. And so these indicator workbooks can be found on our website and are available to view if interested. This here is the list of over 50 criteria we used, organized by theme, which helped us identify the most suitable patches of land within the Elbow and Estevan siting areas. And you can find this list on our website within the indicator workbooks. Through our technical assessments, we had identified and selected 2 areas for further study in the province. So we termed these areas, as you know, the Estevan and Elbow study areas. We evaluated regions around Saskatchewan that appeared to meet our technical and safety criteria. So think back to step 1, where we identified the technical requirements of the technology, and these criteria were informed by the needs of the SMR technology itself and Canada's nuclear regulations and standards, as well as SaskPower's business considerations and learnings. And the regions with a large body of water, existing power and infrastructure, and nearby workforce were prioritized. So in step 3, we used the siting criteria from the past slide to identify and narrow in within the Elbow and Estevan siting areas. We've used the indicators to show patches of higher or lower overall suitability. And from here, we'll be able to identify high potential suitable patches of land for candidate sites. These were the original results before we did any engagement on our siting criteria. So green represents areas that are 70% suitable or higher. The darker the shades, the higher the suitability. And white represents a suitability lower than 70% or an area that has been excluded. So for example, we've avoided siting on high pressure pipelines and we included a 500-meter buffer. We can see these exclusion areas in the white lines in both the Elbow and Estevan suitability maps. In step 4, our criteria and analysis was shared widely with stakeholders and further refined through public and stakeholder engagement, which helped us to better understand community priorities. So this information helped us to narrow further within the suitable siting areas to identify candidate sites. And a number of detailed studies were undertaken to further aid in the narrowing. Multiple technical and field studies have been conducted and will continue as we narrow in within the siting areas. Our siting decision for the project has the potential to adversely impact treaty and Aboriginal rights. The SaskPower self-triggered the provincial duty to consult and has been in contact with those who were located near the study areas or known to exercise rights in and around the areas. And Indigenous and public engagement and consultations with rights holders will continue through the life of the project and beyond. We actively sought feedback on all the indicators through our regional evaluation process, or the REP or REP, as we commonly call it, through a mix of in-person and virtual events. We had 4 full-day workshops in each of the study areas between November 2022 and May 2023. Each study area was represented by a committee with representatives from communities within the 10 and 30-kilometer buffers of their study areas. We also had representation from Indigenous organizations, research and academia, industry, and non-government organizations. We were able to capture over 180 comments on the indicators and criteria. So these are the revised suitability results incorporating the REP feedback. In Elbow, the RM of Maple Bush area, located west of the Gordon Mackenzie arm of Lake Diefenbaker, became slightly less suitable as the potential workforce is further away once we factored the actual travel distance to access the area. In the Estevan area, our previously mined lands were considered or are considered less suitable. And in both areas, REP participants requested additional space for urban development and community growth. We know from looking at facilities in Ontario, communities have grown in these areas. So we included an additional 1 kilometer exclusion area beyond the municipal boundary, which can be seen in the white spaces now seen around the city of Estevan and the village of Elbow. This final map is a variation of the last version, but with a narrowed focus on the areas that are highly suitable for water intake, meaning the infrastructure used to draw the water from the lake or reservoir to the facility. This was further informed by our field and technical assessments. We've taken the siting area from 10 kilometers, the orange boundary, and have narrowed down to 3 kilometer zones around the water bodies, that black boundary. In conclusion of our siting process diagram, step 5 shows the types of in-depth technical work that can be completed once we've identified suitable patches of land within the siting and water intake areas. These studies will grow and continue now that we've narrowed in on 2 sites as we advance through the site selection process this year. So as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we've announced our top 2 sites. The process to determine the short list of sites involved combining all of the applicable site level information. Inputs that were considered were the regional suitability analysis. So this is the work that we just went through, as you saw with the varying suitability maps. Our water intake focus areas. So sites were focused on within these areas in those 3 kilometer zones. Field inspections were completed to review the geotechnical conditions and slope stability, determining if ground conditions and shorelines are suitable for building infrastructure. We studied the bathymetry or depths of the lake, the reservoir, and considered constructability factors. Land parcel size requirements. So we're looking for a half section of land for the facility, and we assessed if the land was owned privately by the Crown or by SaskPower. Land access agreements with landowners. So this is important to gain access so that we can study the land. Additional technical investigations and field verification were also conducted to refine the siting boundaries. And all of this information pulled together was used to help develop an approach to evaluate opportunities, challenges, and trade-offs with the sites identified. While both areas are attractive options for nuclear development, SaskPower has recommended carrying forward the Estevan region into the next and final steps of the siting process for Saskatchewan's first potential nuclear power plant. An additional benefit for the Estevan region is its proximity to the city of Estevan. The project can leverage and build on the existing regional services and infrastructure in the area, such as workforce, accommodations, roads, transmission, and emergency services, which is significant benefit for the project or for our first nuclear project. So through our analysis, we've been able to narrow our list to 2 within the Estevan study area. So this boundary site, so the specific parcels within this candidate site are undisturbed land already owned by SaskPower. They do not contain known coal reserves. However, some of the land surrounding the potential site was previously disturbed via surface mining for coal. This site has an environmental, social, and cultural advantage as it would utilize Boundary Dam Reservoir for cooling. So this reservoir is already used to cool Boundary Dam Power Station, which is identical to how the Boundary Dam coal power plant operates today and will lessen impacts to these water systems. The Rafferty site. So this land is owned privately, but options to purchase have been secured. So the shoreline and access to the water is currently owned by the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency and is designated under the Wildlife Habitat Protection Act. Early discussions have indicated development is possible without major environmental impact, and a technical advantage for this site is the good conditions for constructability of the water intake infrastructure. The Elbow region remains an attractive option for the development of nuclear power. We are continuing to seek land options in the water intake areas of interest, and we will be continuing to work with municipal leaders, communities, and rights holders in the area. So additional technical studies on our top sites are planned to be conducted from now till the end of the year to support the final site selection. We'll be assessing the cost trade-offs for major components of the project, such as transmission and transportation. We'll be starting to look at the sites with respect to constructability and water intake and return infrastructure. So starting to contemplate conceptual site layouts to compare the opportunities or risk factors of the sites. We'll be verifying our desktop findings, which will further aid us with this work. So the geological and hydrogeological environment will need to be confirmed by field drilling studies. A comprehensive drilling program is planned for this summer, and this information will help define the optimal areas to build on the sites. Environmental investigations will continue to build on the information that was collected last year to support siting and baseline data collection. So data gathered from these surveys will help us to select potential sites while protecting our natural environment by avoiding or minimizing impacts to sensitive lands and habitats. Cultural heritage and archaeology investigations are also planned this summer. And that concludes my presentation on the siting. Now, Allison will share more about the next steps for the project, including the site plan and construction we'll walk through our project timeline. Over to you, Allison.
Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah talked about finding a half section of land, but we wanted to provide you more information for the permanent disturbance by showing a normal SMR site size, where the permanent disturbance would be approximately 332 meters by 260 meters, which is about a 21-acre parcel. This is far less of an area than a half section of land, but we would look to that half section to support the exact placement of the facility and temporary construction areas and that type of thing. Sarah also discussed that the potential water intake locations were important in the siting effort, and we used shoreline surveys, bathymetry studies to help us conceptually look at where we would run our water intake and outlet locations, assuming that we would use once-through cooling as our cooling technology. We will continue to refine these plans as we get further into siting efforts and determine our cooling technology. Here, we wanted to go through some of the infrastructure that would be on our site at the various stages of our project, from construction into operation, and and how it might interact with that local environment. We want to highlight that this isn't an actual site layout, but rather we're using this to demonstrate what this would look like and the different components that may be included on our site to give you a sense of what our project might entail. On the screen is one of the main items or buildings, which is the reactor and steam turbine building. This is where the nuclear reactor is present and where fuel, so new fuel going into the reactor, and also used fuel is managed. So this is where used fuel would store for the first 10 years during operation of the facility itself. So this is all housed in that one building. This next piece added to the slide shows the infrastructure for cooling water supply. As discussed previously, we haven't selected our cooling technology yet, but this graphic depicts the use of once-through cooling. This shows the main cooling water infrastructure that interacts with surface water body. On one side is for the supply into the plant area, and the other side is for the water return or outlet side. And this outlet side would be warmer than when it exited the water body initially. For reference, other options would be wet cooling towers, where we would be drawing water from a water body and evaporating it. There are pros and cons to the different cooling options, but we are likely going ahead with once through cooling on the basis that it conserves water and therefore consumes less water for the region if we can appropriately manage those thermal increases, which is something that we'll investigate further as we move further into our siting process. These additional buildings represent the on-site waste management, where we would sort, minimize, and manage all of our waste. Sustainable waste management is a really important element in the nuclear industry and therefore nuclear power plants, where we work to minimize and sustainably manage all of those wastes. So this is where it would go sort of after that first 10 years on site, it would transfer into these long-term waste storage areas within the site. This next section shows the balance of water management infrastructure. So we have on here some storm water retention ponds and a water treatment facility. This is the facility that refines the water and makes it as part of the process water within the reactor building itself. And it cleans it up. There is common infrastructure that we are used to. This is the type of water that's used in other generation options like our coal facilities and our natural gas facilities. So SaskPower is really familiar with managing this balance of water infrastructure. Next up, we wanted to highlight that we'll have some on-site training facilities, some administrative buildings, and parking for on-site staff, as well as security buildings. This site will have a high level of security and will be enclosed and protected, and the site would be accessed through these security areas located sort of, at those points of buildings there. Next, there will be temporary infrastructure to support our construction phase of the project. So this is areas like laydown yards, office trailers or lunchroom trailers, temporary construction equipment, and temporary parking for equipment and employee parking. We'll have things like a concrete batch plant. So this is really a temporary area of disturbance that we would reclaim once the construction is complete as we move into that longer term operation phase of our project. This next portion shows the access and local services that are likely required for the site. These will either be built or upgraded as appropriate. So items like upgrading or building new roads. We are likely to have and need gas service, communications like fiber optics, also construction, distribution power for construction. And as part of this siting effort and investigations, we're starting to map out these types of services that would be required at each of the different sites from a conceptual design level. And we're trying to identify those opportunities and challenges that these types of things might have at each of the sites. And finally, we need to connect to the grid. So we have all of this amazing nuclear power that would be generated, and we need to build it into our system. So that would be connected through our transmission services usually it flows into the 230 kilovolts there and connects into our main power grid. So Sarah talked about the technology selection as one of the first steps in the siting process and how we have chosen the BWRX 300 by GE Hitachi. And this slide really depicts that technology and the conceptual look and feel of it. So this is a rendering that was done for an existing project in Ontario. So Ontario Power Generation's New Darlington project. So it's a concept sketch of a single 300 megawatt reactor and what that might look and feel like. I think that's Lake Ontario in the background, but ours would probably look a little bit more prairie field-like. And we are a close follower of the Ontario Power Generations project, and they should be close to up and running by the time we make our final investment decision. Here we wanted to give an overview of the technology and the image that that we are going to show here of the main plant itself. So this was the first box that we looked at during the site layout mock-up slide, and we'll talk about how we separate the nuclear island from the power island and what that looks like here. So yeah, we wanted to show some of the infrastructure within the reactor building itself. So this is often called the nuclear island, which produces the thermal energy that we are generating. And we would manage all the radiation aspects within this reactor building. So this is where that new fuel would be located and would be put into the reactor itself, and also where the used fuel would be managed as well. On the right-hand side of that nuclear island is the operating and control room. So this is a building outside of the reactor building where operators are constantly monitoring the operations of the facility and performing their functions as operators at the site there. And then to the left of the building there, of the main reactor building, is the power island, which is conventional power room with a turbine hall and steam cycle, where we convert that thermal energy from the reactor building into electricity. And SaskPower is very familiar with this aspect of the facility, as we currently have similar generation that uses and manages this today. So next we have our timeline side, and this is to show that our timeline hasn't changed. We are in that pre-planning mode for the intense regulatory reviews in Canada. And we just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. So we are in 2024, which is in the last year of the site selection process, which is that red bar. And we hope to have that final site chosen by the end of 2025. Our project has to go through both provincial and federal regulatory processes, which are highlighted in the green and light blue and dark blue bars on your screen there. Once our final site is announced, we will submit our initial project description, or IPD, to start the federal impact assessment process. This is a public document, so anyone is able to follow along with us as we are going through our regulatory process. And our regulatory process also includes a federal life cycle nuclear regulator called the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or CNSC. And their process is integrated with the Federal Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, and they issue us our first license. This first license is really about determining if your site is suitable for hosting nuclear power and protecting people and the environment. And it's typically sort of technology neutral. However, as you move through the licensing process, like the license to construct and the license to operate, which are highlighted in the light blue and dark blue lines respectively, they require a little bit more technology information to move through those processes there. So we are on track of moving through all of these processes, but we still have a lot of work to do outside of that regulatory process, such as working through our design process and qualifying our supply chain and looking into those long lead items for our project itself. And we have a lot of continuing ongoing Indigenous and public stakeholder engagement work. And this work has continued from before we started into that pre-planning phase and will continue all throughout our regulatory process and into construction and into operation itself. And I really want to thank everybody for being with us here today. It's a spring evening, and thank you for choosing to learn more about our project with us.
Great, thanks, Allison. Okay, that's all we have in terms of formal presentation material. And as I promised, we'd like to answer some of the questions here. So Sarah, I think you're probably the best one to answer this. Was there one thing in particular that, that made Estevan, that made SaskPower deem Estevan, a more suitable location? Essentially, why Estevan over Elbow in terms of that decision?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate that both regions are very suitable for nuclear development. The benefit for Estevan is just the ability to leverage and build off of the existing regional services and infrastructure in the area, such as that workforce and the accommodations and roads, which is a significant benefit for when we're considering our first nuclear project. It allows us to focus on the project rather than building up those services to support it.
Okay. And now, like, I guess some of these things were probably known. Was there anything else that you kind of learned over the past year that, maybe it was new information that you didn't know going into this process?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a significant amount of study has been completed to ensure that the land locations we've shortlisted are suitable for this next step of site selection. So a lot really goes into it. We mapped out and studied the terrain in those intake areas. We further studied future water availability in both of the regions to ensure that they're suitable. We've done proper desktop studies such as transportation, air, and noise. We've done a ton of field work to characterize the water bodies, so looking at the water currents, temperature, and water chemistry. We also started those environmental surveys in the intake areas, which everything contributes to our confidence to narrow in on the specific sites for this next stage.
Okay. For someone who lives in that area or owns property kind of close to some of those potential candidate sites, any indications of what this might do to property value? And I'm not sure if you have any other experiences to draw from SaskPower's own projects, maybe with obviously other types of generation options, or any other indications from how this has gone in other nuclear jurisdictions in Canada.
Yeah, so when we look at SaskPower's other generation projects, when we're looking at our large gas generation projects, property values have not declined. They've actually increased in those areas. And then when we look at other nuclear jurisdictions in Canada, this is similar. Property values tend to increase in those areas.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Next question is related to just the projected cost of an SMR project like this. So maybe, I'm not sure what's known about that or what's public at this point. And then maybe any kind of comments about, how does the cost of nuclear power compare to, some of the other contenders in the mix that you're working on? Maybe Nanette, if you popped on, if you want to speak to this.
Sure, that is a great question. Always the interesting question, I'm sure. I don't think we have numbers that we can share today on the specific cost of this project, but we will be releasing a chart showing our levelized costs of electricity with our long-term supply plan final report that's coming out here at the end of June. So that report will be called Recommendations to Power Our Future to 2024 or 2024, this year. And you can find that at saskpower.com/engage. The chart will speak to levelized cost of electricity comparing a number of our supply options. And the levelized cost of electricity gives you a little bit of context of within Saskatchewan, what would the range of potential costs be for typical projects? So you look at the cost to design, construct, operate, and utilize that plant over its entire life cycle. And that cost is divided by the amount of energy that you'll be getting out of that facility. And when you look at things like small modular reactors, it's really within a similar range of compared to our other options. As we're looking to the future, we need to look to new opportunities to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So these are power facilities that have really low emissions or no emissions, as in the case of small modular reactors. And so that puts the cost for small modular reactors really in the same kind of range as comparable future technologies, such as additional hydro, carbon capture and storage on some of our natural gas facilities, for example.
Okay, thanks, Nanette. I want to invite Steve to come on this. I think this is a specific question just on the safety side. So, Steve, can you speak to this? again, for anyone that's concerned about safety with nuclear, how safe are nuclear reactors? And again, especially given, because when these things fail, we know where they're from. Fukushima, I guess, is maybe one of the more recent ones. If you want to maybe just speak to that whole question of safety, and then what are some of the lessons that have been learned from some of those other cases?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'd actually say that modern reactors are actually safer because of those past failures. And so the nuclear industry puts a lot of effort into learning everything that we can. And so you mentioned Fukushima, so Japan. So one of the examples there that we learned was how difficult it can be to make sure you can power pumps inside a reactor vessel to keep the fuel cool. And so the BWX-300 reactor that Alison was talking about today actually removes those pumps. And so instead it relies on natural convection. And so the reactor we're looking at is safe without any power whatsoever. And so that's a very specific example, but throughout the history of nuclear, it's a constant case of learning lessons from those past failures.
Okay, thank you. A question on the economic side, maybe Alison, you can speak to this. Obviously, there's a huge construction effort that's required. How many jobs are you anticipating, this project to create during, I guess there's that initial construction phase, but then also, in the ongoing operation?
Yeah, those are really great questions. I think for the construction phase, at peak construction, we're anticipating it to be about 1,500 workers at the site at in and around one time, so fairly substantial amount there. And as we get into sort of the full-time operation side of things, we're expecting about 130 to be present at the site and facility itself, and about another 50 jobs that would be offsite. So some more of the administrative type things that are offsite. So about 180 jobs in total during the operation phase of the project. We have talked about the site is for our first 300 megawatts, but that we'd be looking at adding that second facility. So you don't really do ×2 for that 180. There are some efficiencies that can be gained. So if 2 were to be in operation at this site, it'd be about 225 to 250 staff would be there for the full-time operation of 300 SMRs.
Okay, thanks. Just a question, I think maybe for Nanette. There's just a comment here that's on recommendation number 4. There's some indications about SaskPower looking at other nuclear options besides, some of maybe the sizes that you're talking about. Can you maybe just talk about sort of the size of fit, for an SMR? I think that sounds like it's about roughly equivalent to some other ones. But I mean, in the future, is there the possibility of looking at some of the other larger reactors as well if SaskPower goes down this path?
Yeah, definitely into the future, that could become an opportunity for us. And that's a great question because it really highlights the reason we're looking at small modular reactors right now. One of the reasons is that they are in that right size to fit into our current system. We always speak to our single largest contingency. We have to plan our system to be able to handle the loss of our largest unit, which we call our single largest contingency. And that 300 megawatt SMR is really that right size to fit into that range. In the future, if we start to add more nuclear power and our power demand grows and we design our system in a different way, we could expand that single largest contingency, and that's where we might consider some of those larger traditional reactors in the future.
Okay. Just a question here. There was, again, another mention of advanced reactors, among some other things. Can someone maybe just explain what is an advanced reactor for those of us that haven't heard that term before? And maybe I see Steve coming on. Steve, do you want to speak to that?
That's right. Always happy to talk about advanced reactors.
Okay.
And so, yeah, one way so what we're talking about today so far has been a water-cooled reactor. And so some of these advanced reactors use helium cooling or liquid metal cooling. And one of the advantages of that is you can go to much higher temperatures. And that becomes particularly important if you want to use it for industrial decarbonization, where we use the heat from the reactor to, say, help power a potash mine in Saskatchewan or a fertilizer plant or a steel facility. And so those extra temperatures makes the reactor more efficient, but you can also use it for other industrial purposes. Whereas today we use natural gas as big boilers when we need that heat in industry.
Okay, thanks. Just a question about again, I guess anyone that would have been looking at the map, that reactor is, I live in Regina. It's probably closer to the U.S. border than it is to some major centers in Regina. Does the proximity of this project to the U.S. border trigger any kind of requirements to consult with our neighbors to the south?
I can probably take that question. So our project, like we've talked about, has to go through the regulatory process in Canada, and part of that is looking nationwide, so in Canada, but does look to see if there are requirements to look to the southern border. So we have been engaging with our regulators, and we have been engaging with Indigenous communities and the public in and around here. And through our regional evaluation process, we did reach out to the United States to start some of those discussions. And if they become a little bit more active, we will engage with them at that point in time. But there is no firm requirement until you sort of start looking at, what your potential effects and stuff like that might be through those regulatory processes. But if there are, we would be advancing those discussions and ensure that we are complying with all regulations.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks to all of our panelists for answering those questions, and thanks to all of you for those questions. That's great. I just want to recap some of the upcoming engagement opportunities. And of course, over some of these next months, SaskPower will be reaching out to many of you if you live in those areas, and will continue to be available to residents in areas closest to the candidate sites. So here's some of the upcoming dates. Starting in June 25th to 27th. So Oxbow, Estevan, an additional date for Estevan on the 26th, Torquay, Macun, and on June 27th, Mydale and Weyburn. So SaskPower will be sending out a poster that you can use to pin up to the community boards in town, your office, as well as, again, if you have any kind of community Facebook or social media pages, that's a great help in terms of promoting the events and building the awareness. And some of the folks that you would have met today, some of the technical team, as well as others who work on this, folks like Alexis and Travis will be attending many of those events. And of course, they're happy to keep you up to date in terms of project information and answer as many questions as they're able to. Being that Estevan and Macun are the closest communities to the two potential areas, SaskPower will have a smaller team available over longer hours to be available to connect with people in the area. These will be less of an event in terms of the format, but SaskPower just wanted to have a more consistent presence over the summer. Again, should folks want to learn more about the project or ask any questions. So if you look at the calendar view there, the Macun dates align on Wednesdays for the months of July and August, and Estevan you'll see scheduled there every other Thursday. And of course, there's a number of ways online to stay up to date on the project, and the Engagement Hub is designed for you to interact. Up there, you can post a question to the team. There's activities up there that are ongoing, polls, if you have ideas, surveys, things like that. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, probably the best way to make sure that you're up to date, and again, we don't send them out a lot, but that's a good occasional update to your inbox from SaskPower. Those are sent out when there's things to share. Again, updates like this, reports being released, or any new opportunities to engage. So there's also a specific project page where SaskPower posts up things like some of the maps that Sarah was walking us through, reports, and general project information. So yeah, in terms of staying up to date, saskpower.com/nuclear. And I'm going to launch a final poll here, and I'll leave this open for a little bit here so you can give us any feedback on the session here. There's 8 questions that we'd like you to answer there, and we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. I'll just walk through them. I don't know, was the information helpful? Do you feel like this was a good use of your time? Then a few other questions just about how you see SaskPower in terms of these kind of engagement opportunities. So with that, I will leave that poll open for another couple of minutes. And please complete that for us. It really does help us to improve these things. So with that, my sincere thank you for joining us on a nice evening. And again, hope to see you at a session like this again in the future. And with that, again, on behalf of SaskPower and myself, thanks for joining tonight, and have a good evening.